Two couples murdered 4 months apart in Washington state. The women both sexually assaulted with tube socks tied around their necks. Could it be a serial killer? Other cases in the area bearing similarities have since been closed, but these two remain connected and unsolved. What's ahead? Welcome to the Haunt 329. Today, we'll be looking at the tube sock killings case. But before that, please consider subscribing if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel. Now, let's get into the breathtaking case. The tube sock murders and related cases occurred in rural regions of the Seattle metropolitan area located in the northwestern United States, including 7 counties that encircle Seattle. The area's population in the mid-late 1980s was approaching 2,500,000. Today, it's more than 4 million, which is over half of Washington's population overall. It's the birthplace of major companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and Microsoft, and it's also known for infamous serial killings. Ted Bundy operated in Seattle and the state park wilderness regions in the early 1970s, and Gary Ridgway followed in the 1980s. On August 10, 1985, Stephen Harkins, 27, and his girlfriend Ruth Cooper, 42, attended a wedding reception in Tacoma, Washington before heading to the mountains for a weekend camping trip. Stephen, a truck driver from Tacoma, and Ruth, a mechanist and mother of 5 from Portland, Oregon, set up camp in a clearing near the Hearts and Tool Lakes in southwestern Pierce County. Tragically, the couple was likely killed that same night after going to sleep. On Monday, 72-year-old Walter Funk spotted a Volkswagen station wagon where Stephen and Ruth had been camping. Seeing it again on Wednesday, he investigated and found Stephen Harkins' body in a sleeping bag next to the vehicle. Stephen had been killed by a gunshot to the forehead. Ruth was missing, but their dog was found shot in the head nearby. With Ruth's belongings still at the campsite, police believe she had been kidnapped and murdered. Despite investigative efforts, Ruth remained missing for over 2 months. On October 26, 1985, hunters found a skull with long black hair near 8th Avenue South, about a mile from the campsite. The next day, search dogs found Ruth Cooper's headless body about 50 feet away, hidden in dense brush. Her purse and ID were nearby, and a tube sock was tied around her neck. An autopsy revealed Ruth was shot in the abdomen, and the sock was likely used to control her during a sexual assault. Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper's murders remain unsolved. The only suspect is an unidentified man who appeared at the wedding reception, allegedly seeking Stephen over a motorcycle dispute. On December 12, 1985, Mike Reamer, a 36-year-old roofer and trapper from Puyallup, Washington, planned to check his traps along the Nisqually River, including the Tool Lake area where Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper had been murdered. That morning, he borrowed gas money from his father, mentioning plans to check traps and pick up overtime work. Mike took his girlfriend, 21-year-old Diana Robertson, and their 2-year-old daughter, Crystal, with him. Their relationship was tumultuous, with a history of domestic violence and a restraining order still in effect. Despite reconciliation efforts, tensions remained. Diana's family described Mike as a jealous abuser. The couple, along with their daughter, reportedly went to find a Christmas tree, a detail mentioned only in an Unsolved Mysteries episode and questioned for its accuracy. Mike's pickup truck was already loaded with trapping equipment, making it unlikely they were also collecting a tree. On December 12th, as usual, Mike checked traps while Diana and Crystal stayed in the truck. Mike carried a .22 caliber handgun for safety. When Mike didn't return home, his father filed a missing persons report. Police deemed the search area too large, prompting family and friends to organize their own search efforts. 3 days later, a nurse recognized the missing girl, Crystal Robertson, from the news. Employees at a Spanaway, Washington Kmart had found her on December 12th, silent and alone, with minor cuts and bruises. Crystal, just 2 years old, was identified by her grandmother, Louise. After the reunion, Louise noted the Crystal was withdrawn and moody, repeatedly saying, "Mommy's in the trees." A private investigator hired by Mike Reamer's father found a potential eyewitness, a Red Cross bell ringer who claimed to have seen Mike's red truck in the Kmart lot between 4 and 5 p.m. This sighting was unconfirmed, and no one saw the vehicle move or any people near it. As a retired Washington State game warden, Lloyd Reamer, Mike's father, led search efforts for Mike and Diana, checking Mike's traps several times a week. Despite his efforts, it wasn't until February 18, 1986, that a man driving on Route 7 found Mike's abandoned truck and Diana's remains nearby. The site was in dense forest land in Lewis County, west of Mineral, Washington. Mike and his gun were missing. Lloyd had previously passed the area, assuming Mike didn't trap there. Mike's truck contained an empty manila envelope with, "I love you, Diana," written on it, which Diana's mother identified as Mike's handwriting, though lab analysis was inconclusive. Human bloodstains were found on the front passenger seat, but were too degraded for DNA testing. Diana Robertson's remains were identified by dental records. She was nude from the waist up, her hands were tied, and a tube sock was around her neck, similar to Ruth Cooper's case. The sock had matching knots, but were not from the same manufacturer. Diana had died from multiple stab wounds and appeared to have been struck as well. With Diana Robertson found murdered and Mike Reamer and his gun missing, suspicion grew that Mike had killed Diana, dropped their daughter at a random Kmart, and fled. Some suspected him of also murdering Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper. Investigators agreed that Mike would be a suspect if he were known to be alive. However, Mike's father, Lloyd, believed in his son's innocence and continued searching, pointing out that Mike had left his winter coat in his truck and hadn't contacted his family or accessed its bank account since his disappearance. Lloyd's wife had died in 1983, and he passed away in 1993 without knowing Mike's fate. On March 26, 2011, a hiker found Mike's partial remains less than a mile from where his truck and Diana's remains had been discovered. The remains included a skull, jawbone, a rubber boot, clothing pieces, and a weathered ID card. The skull, with a 35-year-old tree growing out of it, indicated Mike died close to the time he disappeared. An autopsy couldn't determine Mike's cause of death, but found no signs of head trauma or gunshot wounds. This discovery suggested Mike might have been murdered alongside Diana, similar to Harkins and Cooper. However, detectives couldn't rule out the possibility that Mike killed himself after murdering Diana, as his .22 caliber handgun remains missing. In 1985, Edward Smith and his fiancée, Kimberly Levine, were murdered in a case similar to the unsolved tube sock murders. On March 9th, the couple who had moved to Kent, Washington, were killed during a sightseeing trip. Their abandoned car was found on March 10th near the Columbia River. Edward's body, with his throat slashed and hands and feet bound, was found later that day in Beverly. Kimberly's skeletal remains were discovered 5 months later, bound, but with an undetermined cause of death. Bill Baylord, who was linked to the case, had a history of violent crimes. In August 1985, he robbed a gas station in Wyoming, kidnapped and assaulted the clerk, and then fled. By September, he was arrested in Aspen, Colorado, and later extradited to Wyoming. He escaped jail in March 1986, but was recaptured in Montana. Baylord was sentenced to 55 to 90 years for the Wyoming crimes. In April 1989, police matched Baylord's fingerprints to the Smith and Levine case, and he pleaded guilty to their murders in 1991. Although the Smith and Levine murders share similarities with the tube sock murders, Baylord couldn't have committed the latter as he was in custody by September 21, 1985, and remained in prison thereafter. Jay Cook, 20, and Tanya Van Coilenborg, 18, from Victoria, British Columbia, had been dating for 6 months when they planned a trip to Seattle on November 18, 1987, to pick up parts for Jay's father's furnace business. Jay intended to save hotel money by camping in their van. They were seen taking the ferry from Victoria to Port Angeles and later in Hoodsport and Allen, Washington, where they bought a ferry ticket to Seattle. Though believed to have taken the 10:35 p.m. ferry, no one saw them after that. Their families reported them missing on November 20th. A man discovered Tanya Van Coilenborg's body in Skagit County, Washington on November 24th. She was nude from the waist down and had been raped and shot in the head. plastic ties, and a small caliber shell casing were found nearby. Later that day, Tanya's wallet and keys were found in an alley in Bellingham, Washington, 14 miles away. Police also found small caliber ammunition and talcum powder coated surgical gloves, preventing fingerprints. The next day, the couple's van was found near a Greyhound bus station. It contained more clues, including a money order for furnace parts, plastic ties with unidentified DNA, and Tanya's semen-stained pants. Initially, police considered robbery and Jay Cook as a suspect, but that changed when Jay's body was found on a Thanksgiving day in Snohomish County, 60 miles away. He was covered in a blue blanket with weathered plastic ties nearby. His killer had used 2 red dog collars as a garrote and shoved cigarettes down his throat. Jay died from strangulation, asphyxiation, and blunt force trauma. In 2018, a genetic genealogist linked DNA from Jay and Tanya's case to 55-year-old William Talbot, whose palm print also matched one found on their van. At the time of the 1987 murders, Talbot, then 24, was a delivery truck driver living in Woodinville, Washington. He had a history of violence, drug and alcohol use, and a criminal record including indecent exposure and assault. Despite the DNA match, Talbot claimed he had consensual sex with Tanya and denied involvement in the murders. In June 2019, Talbot was found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and received 2 life sentences without parole. In December 2021, his conviction was reversed due to a biased juror, but the sentence was reinstated in December 2022. Talbot argued investigators had tunnel vision and that the DNA only proved sexual contact, not murder. He remains a person of interest in the Tube Sock murders, having lived in the region and worked as a delivery truck driver during that time. Michelle McNamara examined the Tube Sock murders on her blog, True Crime Diary. Her main lead was Joseph Burgess, suspected in the 1972 Vancouver Island murders of Leif Carlson and Anne Durant, and the 2004 murders of Jason Allen and Lindsay Cutshall in Jenner, California. Burgess's crimes span the western US and southern Canada, with fingerprints connecting him to remote cabin robberies. However, no evidence links Burgess to the Tube Sock murders. If he killed, his motive was robbery or religious retribution, not sexual gratification. His victims were found together, shot in their sleep, and not hidden, tied up, beaten, or sexually assaulted. Burgess was killed in a standoff with police in 2009. Michelle explored several possible suspects linked to the Tube Sock murders. Robert Yates, who first killed a couple in 1972 and later targeted sex workers, was arrested in 2000 after DNA linked him to multiple unsolved cases. Although sentenced to death, his sentence was commuted to life without parole in 2018. However, Yates was not connected to Jay Cook and Tanya van Keulenborg's murders. She also considered Ronald Troy, tied by DNA in 2021 to a 1977 double murder in Oregon. Troy, who committed suicide earlier that year, had no other known crimes. Another suspect, John Kelly, confessed to the 1988 murders of Douglas and Rosina Anderson in California. Kelly, connected to another murdered via DNA in 2012, was sentenced to life without parole. Cold case detectives hope DNA will finally solve the Tube Sock murders. They are working to obtain profiles from a ligature used to tie Diana's hands and from Mike Reamer's remains, but face challenges in prioritizing resources over more recent cases. Until then, whether the Tube Sock killer is dead, in prison, or still free remains uncertain. What's your opinion on this case? I would like to know your view on this case in the comment section. Till then, take care and keep watching the Haunt 329.